Hello and welcome back to Offbeat Gyan. This video is part 2 of the summary of Russian writer Anton Chekov's short story, Ward Number 6. I had uploaded the first part 3 months back, and there were a couple of requests for the second part. I'm sorry about the delay, but I just hope it is helpful now. And so let's proceed with the part 2 of the summary. Part 1 had concluded with a description of the inmates of the lunatic asylum called Ward Number 6, which was a annex inside the main hospital. And Anton Chekhov is a Russian writer. This is one of his most important, most famous, and disturbing stories. It is actually longer than a short story, and it is shorter than a novel. So I think it would be right to classify it as a novella. It has a number of characters, and the character description of the inmates of the asylum has already been given in part 1. So let me proceed with part 2. Nobody visited the inmates of Ward Number 6. The only person who came there, the only person who was always there was Nikita, the caretaker, the watchman, the provider, the disciplinarian, everything. And he was very brutal with the inmates. When they did not proceed according to his wishes, he would beat them up. And he was a man of low intelligence, and he believed that this was the only treatment that the inmates of the lunatic asylum deserved. But soon there were rumors that the doctor, the main doctor, the doctor in charge of the hospital, Dr. Andrei Yefimich, had started visiting the ward. This Dr. Andrei Yefimich Ragin was a strange man. He had wanted to join the church as a young man. He had been very religious and he had finished his high school in 1863. He wanted to study in the theological seminary, but his father, a doctor and surgeon, had other plans for him. So he used to ridicule his son's plans to become a priest, and he threatened him that I'm not going to give you any money in order to pursue your theological studies. I don't want you to become a priest. So Yefimich, he had to listen to his father, even though he did not have any interest in medicine. He took up medical studies. He completed his medicine course and he was posted to a remote provincial hospital somewhere in Russia. How did this man look? Well, he was tall, heavily built, with coarse features. That means no sharp features, no well defined features on his face, a sort of plump nose and a plump face. And he looked very strong and very surly. He had little eyes, a red nose, and a beard. In fact, he looked very scary and intimidating. But basically, he was a gentleman. He was a very polite man. And his appearance could be very scary. He was actually very careless about his appearance also. His clothes were unironed, they were crumpled, and he used to get them from a Jewish shop. He had a swelling on his neck which prevented him from wearing starched collars. So he comes, he takes charge of the hospital, and he finds that the hospital is in a pathetic condition. It's very dirty. The patients and the families sleep together. The surgical wards were infested with bugs, and most of the patients they suffered from the erysipelas skin infection. The doctors, nurses, and attendants were extremely indisciplined and they used to cheat the patients. The doctor who used to work there before Yefimich, he used to steal alcohol from the hospital and he also had sex with the female patients and the nurses. So everyone in that town, they knew about the goings on at the hospital, but they did nothing about it. They felt that the hospital may be in a bad condition, but at least they had a hospital. and they felt that the lunatics were better off there than at home. And they blamed the local assembly called the Zemstvo for the hospital's condition. Yefimich felt that the hospital was immoral and bad for the townspeople. He wanted it to be closed down. He was not particularly worried about the problems of the hospital, but he did try to make a few changes. He ordered that the nurses and the attendants must not sleep in the ward itself, and he also bought a couple of instruments. Everything else remained unchanged, the same way. Yefimich was a man who loved intelligence and honesty, but at the same time, he himself did not have the strong will to implement rules and restore discipline in the hospital. He avoided taking action against all those who robbed and cheated the patients and him. In the beginning, he was very enthusiastic, but then the number of patients was so huge and the work was so dull and monotonous. Plus, he was uninterested in being a doctor. So, all these factors together made him very, very bored, and he found his job to be very monotonous. And he felt that if he actually wanted to make a change in the hospital, then the hospital had to be cleaned out and it had to have proper ventilation. Good food had to be provided to the patients. So he was not willing to make all these changes. And he had read about suffering making people perfect, and that if suffering was reduced with the use of medicine, then people would actually move away from God and faith. He thought of Pushkin suffering before his death and believed that he too would suffer before death. So these thoughts made him think of his work as useless, and he stopped going to the hospital. He woke up at 8 in the morning, dressed, and he drank his tea. Then he read or he visited the hospital. When he went to the hospital, he was met by his assistant, Sergei Sergeyevich. This man, he had his own flourishing practice in the town, and he considered himself to be a better doctor than Yefimich. And he was the one who had placed the Christian icon inside the hospital of a Christian saint. Now, Yefimich, he hated the sight of blood and he did not perform any operations. What he did was he would go to the hospital, he would see 5 or 6 patients, prescribe some medicine, then he would leave the hospital and go home. And he would forget about what is happening in the hospital. He enjoyed reading and he used to buy a lot of books. And 3 of the 6 rooms in his house were filled with books. His favorite books were on history and philosophy, and he also used to subscribe to a magazine called The Doctor. He had a housekeeper who used to cook for him. She was not a good cook, and her name was Daryushka. And in the evening, his friend Mihail Avryanich used to come. This man was a postmaster. Once upon a time, he had been a rich man and he had been in the cavalry, but he became poor, and so he had to take up a job in the post office. He was very short tempered, but he got along well with Avryanich. Sorry, he got along well with Yefimich. And Yefimich and Avryanich, both of them, they considered the townspeople to be inferior to them. So they would sit down and they would drink and talk for a long time. And both of them agreed that they did not believe in immortality. Till 9 o'clock, Avryanich would sit and talk with Yefimich, and then after that, he would go home. Then Yefimich would spend the remaining time thinking about his past. He thought about the suffering patients in his hospital, about Nikita beating up patients, about Museka, the one of the patients in the asylum, begging in the town. Then he would think about the advances in medicine, the antiseptic system of operations, the cure for syphilis, theory of heredity, hypnotism, discoveries of Pasteur and Koch, and of hygiene. He also thought about the developments in the field of psychiatry and the humane treatment of mad people. He knew that if ward number 6 was anywhere else, then it would have been definitely closed down. But the ignorant townspeople, they looked upon the doctors as gods, and that is why the hospital continued to work. He feels very guilty about his indifference to his patients, and he also realizes that he is getting a salary despite cheating his patients. And he would feel very bad about this. He would berate himself for his dishonesty. And he would keep on thinking like this about all these things until 3 in the morning when he went to sleep. Yevgeny Fyodorich Hobutov was the young assistant district doctor. Sorry, he was the young district doctor who was invited to assist Yefimich. An amount of 300 rubles had been sanctioned for additional medical services in the town. This Hobutov, he was under 30, tall, dark, and penniless. And when he came into the town, he had a small suitcase. There was a young woman, a plain young woman with a baby who accompanied him. He referred to her as his cook. And he became very friendly with Sergei Sergeyevich, and he also befriended the treasurer and the medical assistants. But he stayed away from all the other officials, and he contemptuously referred to them as aristocrats or members of the upper class. The only book he had read was the only book he had, whether he has read or not, we don't know. The only book he had was the latest prescriptions of the Vienna Clinic for 1881. And whenever he went to visit a patient, he always took this book with him. In the evenings, he used to play billiards in the club, and he went to the hospital twice a week. When he went to the hospital, he would walk around the wards and he would see the outpatients. He also did not make any changes, and he was afraid and jealous of Yefimich. He felt that Yefimich is very sly, that Yefimich is a cunning man, and that he has a lot of money. Anyway, one spring evening in March, Yefimich was going out of the hospital, and he was planning to go and visit his friend Avrianich, and he sees Museka barefoot walking back from the visit to the town. And he feels very bad on seeing Museka in such a bad condition. So he asks Nikita to meet the superintendent and get boots for the barefooted Museka. And then he walks into the ward and he meets the angry and agitated Gromov. Gromov is a very intelligent and well read man who was also very paranoid. And his paranoia, his fear that there are people out to get him, there are people out to trap him, is what had put him in the lunatic asylum. So as soon as Gromov sees Yefimich, he addresses him as uh, a cursed reptile. And he also asks him, "Why are you keeping me in this asylum?" And Yefimich is intrigued by the young man and his intelligence. And he talks to Gromov. He begins talking to Gromov. And soon he starts visiting ward number 6 on a regular basis. Whenever he gets time, he goes to ward number 6 to talk to Gromov. But Gromov is somebody who has sudden mood swings. Sometimes he is very calm, but at other times he yearns for freedom from the ward. And the doctor tells him that it is all a matter of the mind and that the system demanded that Gromov must be confined in an asylum. One day, Hobotov sees Yefimich talking to Gromov. Gromov was restless and twitching while Yefimich sat motionless, looking very helpless and sad. The next day, Sergei Sergeyevich goes with him to check on Yefimich in ward number 6. And Yefimich has changed his entire routine after talking to Gromov in ward number 6. So now everybody starts talking about his meetings with Gromov, and he finds people looking at him very strangely. Even the superintendent's little daughter, Masha, runs away from him when he walks up to her. So in August, he gets a letter from the mayor asking him to come for a meeting. And Yefimich goes for the meeting, and he finds that there is a big group of people waiting to talk to him. There is a military commander, there is a superintendent of the district school, a town council member, Hobotov is also there, and there is another Polish doctor. And they start asking him all sorts of questions. And he answers them. But only after the meeting does he realize that they had been asking questions to find out about his mental condition. That evening, his friend, the postmaster, Mihail Avrianich, comes to see him and tells him that he had met Dr. Hobotov who had commented on Yefimich's mental condition and had advised that he must take rest. So, Abrianich says that both of them they can go for a trip to Warsaw and other places. But Yefimich does not want to leave. He himself is worried because he finds that there is something wrong in the committee's questions and he realizes that he might be in a difficult situation. But Abrianich persists and then he has to agree. And they take a train journey. But Yefimich finds that Abrianich has become an extremely irritating and talkative man, and Yefimich can't stand him. He is very loud and extremely talkative in the train and also in the hotel where they stay. So Yefimich feels very irritated with his friend, with his loud manners, but he is not able to speak about this openly to Abrianich. Plus, Abrianich also borrows money from him. So, whenever Abrianich tries to take him out of the hotel and visit places, Yefimich is very hesitant. Yefimich spends most of his time close with his eyes closed and trying to protect himself from the vexatious manner in which his friend is behaving. Anyway, finally, he manages to persuade Avryanich that they must return home. And so both of them they return to the provincial town somewhere in Russia. And Yefimich finds that his job has been taken over by Hubutov. His home is also gone. So he has to move to a smaller place with Daryushka, and he does not even have a pension. He doesn't have much money. He realizes that he has only 86 rubles, and Avryanich has not returned the money that he had borrowed from him. And every day, Hubutov and Avryanich come to meet him. He doesn't have anything much to say to them. He only wants to meet Gromov. But Gromov is perpetually agitated and restless. One day, what happens? Hubutov takes him to ward number 6 and leaves Yefimich there. And Yefimich tries to talk to Gromov, but he finds that Gromov is in an extremely violent mood, and Gromov behaves very badly with him. So Dr. Yefimich tries to escape from ward number 6, but he himself is beaten up by Nikita, and he realizes that all his philosophy and intellect cannot help him. It cannot help him to escape from ward number 6. So he accepts his stay in the lunatic asylum called ward number 6. With this, we come to the end of the story. I hope it will help you, and thank you.